Good evening. Thank you all for joining the UVA Club of Jacksonville's wine tasting with Jefferson Vineyards. We should have a great event tonight. I just want to go over some Zoom rules, particularly the chat function. Throughout the entire talk, feel free to ask questions, comments, concerns. What we like doing is we like knowing who's in the room, HOO, who's in the room, you know. So feel free to put your information in the chat, your affiliation, anything UVA. We love building that community. And then at the end, yeah, we'll get to your questions and hopefully have a lively discussion about Jefferson Vineyards. I would like to let Attila and Chris introduce themselves on behalf of Jefferson Vineyards. Attila, Chris, thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Ritzcovan. I'm the winemaker here at Jefferson Vineyards. I'm also a 2006 graduate of the university. I'm originally from New York and moved down to Charlottesville to attend school, and I've first started working at the vineyard in 2007.
Hi, everyone. My name is Attila Woodward. I did not attend a full 4 years at UVA, but I did take some courses there. So that is sort of my little link there. I am the third generation owner at Jefferson Vineyards. This endeavor was started by my grandparents with the help of some very talented winemakers and other people. And I've been here off and on for the last 3 decades. And very excited that we're all doing this together. Thank you so much for having us.
Attila, would you like to screen share?
Sure. So what I wanted to do was, for those who haven't been here, we thought maybe it would be helpful just to give a little bit of an introduction. Naturally, Chris, as the winemaker, is the more interesting person for tonight to talk to about the wines and all that. But I wanted to give you a little bit of context. Some of you have visited us or may have been here before. But from a historic perspective, Thomas Jefferson gave 193 acres of his land to an Italian viticulturalist. His name was Filippo Mazzei, or in the US, we call him Philip Mazzei. The Mazzei family is actually a very prominent winemaking family. They've been making wine for hundreds of years in Italy. So when this Italian came to spend a night at Monticello, Jefferson sort of stole him and convinced him to become his neighbor. And so he gave him land and gave him other resources to start the first commercial vineyard in the Virginia colony. Collie was the main house where Philippe Mazzei lived and where he worked from. The vineyards were surrounding the Collie house. In the late 1930s, my grandparents moved down to Virginia to have a second home. They were very much involved with the White House and with diplomacy. And so they needed a place to entertain. And so Collie was rebuilt on the foundation of the original house. And they basically used this as their home, as an entertainment place. But today this is a short-term rental. So you can actually stay on the property in this historic house, and we do rent it out. The other thing that my grandparents did, which I'm extremely grateful for, is that they put a conservation easement, and it was the first of its kind in Albemarle County. Our property, which is about 700 acres, sits between Highland, so Ashlawn Highland, James Monroe's home, and it borders Tufton Farm, which is part of the Monticello estate, or the Thomas Jefferson Foundation estate. So my grandparents felt it was really important to protect this piece of land that sits right in between these two presidential homes and protect it with an easement so it could be preserved. We do other farming activities. I apologize if the video is not very clear, but we do have cattle, Angus, on the property. We also have multiple gardens, and some of you may have visited and seen this, but we're really trying to do our best in terms of conservation and in terms of the pollinators, bees especially. So we do have over 7 acres of our property, which are meadows, wildflowers, that serve as nutrients and food for the bees. Here you can see about 10 different hives that we have on one side of the property. We're actually going to set up another 10 hives. And what's very interesting is that Monticello, our farm, Highland, and another farm is sort of a bee corridor. We all have beekeeping. Well, we're all doing beekeeping. We have hives, and so we have this very neat corridor of dedicated to bees and to their success. We're a small winery. We produce between 6,000 to 7,000 cases a year, but because of our location and our history, and next year we'll be celebrating 40 years, we do get a lot of tasters. Of course, this has changed now, but we used to get somewhere around 35,000 tasters a year before. What sets us apart from other vineyards that have planted their vineyards in 1 or 2 locations is that we didn't do this the smart way in terms of financial efficiency. We did it more with the hope to find the best sites on the property. And so what you can see on this image is 4 of our different vineyard sites. You'll notice that many of them are surrounded by forests or trees. This makes it more expensive to manage, but what we can get out of the land with this configuration is some very neat differences with the same type of grapes that we've planted in 2 or 3 of these different sites. So it gives us some leeway when we make blends or we make varietals. And again, it's not the smartest way to manage a vineyard, but I think we are winning in the on the side of having just different manifestations and characters to the grapes depending on where they're planted. Most of our labor is manual. We do use a hedger, which is a machine that's attached to a tractor, and it basically cuts the vines so you can have good airflow. But everything else is done by hand. Harvest is something that we celebrate. Chris is on the right here in this picture, and the person on the left is David Woodside. He's the assistant winemaker. Chris will talk to you a little bit more about winemaking for white wines and red wine. And for red wines, it's a little bit more extensive. So I wanted to show you this picture, and Chris might allude to it later on. We also have different brands, and the one you're going to taste first is the Viognier 2018. This bottle is part of what we call the signature series. We actually have the trademark for Thomas Jefferson's signature on wine. And so we have 3 of our top wines, which is Viognier, Chardonnay Reserve, and Emeritage, that carry his signature, emblematic of the higher quality production of wine that he was trying to accomplish here with Philippe Matzey. The next one to the right is the semi-sweet rosé. We have 5 wines that have art on their label, and you'll notice there's no logo, there's no name of Jefferson Vineyards in the front. We purposely wanted this wine, which is meant to be a young, fun wine, to be all about the art and the enjoyment of it. So no branding except on the back. Then we have a varietal series, and we call it the Jefferson Vineyards series. In here you can see a bottle of Petit Rideau. We have a number of wines. And over the last couple of years, Chris has been experimenting with white wines that are skin fermented. So basically this makes the white wines a little bit more complex when you ferment them on their skin. It also changes their color a little bit. You might know them as orange wines. And to the right is our estate reserve, or Jefferson's own estate reserve. This is really an ode to Thomas Jefferson, because even though he did not do all of the work, he was a very, very important person to get things started here in the late 1700s. I mean, without him, our history would be very different. So we felt it was very important to recognize his contribution. And with that said, I want to take a step back, and I want you all to hear from Chris, because he is the star of tonight, as are you all. So thank you very much, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Perfect. Okay. Hey everyone again. I would say the wines are the star of tonight's show, not myself, but I'm going to go over basically a few of the wines, each of these wines, how we make them, where they're from, things like that. Please feel free to ask, submit questions to Josh, and we'll try and answer them maybe throughout, but definitely at the end as well. For starters, we have our 2018 Viognier. For those of you who are not aware, Viognier is it's a white grape that comes from the northern Rhone region of France. It's you've probably had it before if you've had any Côte Rôtie Syrah. They usually put in sometimes 5 to 15% Viognier. It's not. My mom always calls it Viognier, but you know the G is silent. It is Viognier, and it's a grape that you don't see, that you haven't seen very often, mostly just in France, in Condrieu and northern Rhone. But over the last decade, it's really gained popularity. You can even go to Trader Joe's and get a California Viognier. They grow it really well in Texas. But I think, I am biased obviously, but I think Virginia produces some of the best Viognier in the world. We have this beautiful balance of climate between having a longer growing season than France, but not quite as long and hot as California. And we have these wonderful floral, aromatic, fruit-forward wines. It's our flagship white wine. We put a lot of emphasis on it. And we actually make, as Attila mentioned, we make skin fermented Viognier, we make this traditional Viognier, and a lot of times we make a very exclusive small batch estate reserve wine that's traditionally based in Viognier. But the whole winemaking process, if you're not familiar, it's very different between white grapes, rosés, and red wines, which is why we gave you those 3 wines. For starters, the Viognier is, all of our fruit at Jefferson Vineyards is actually picked by hand. We pick them into about half-ton lugs. The white grapes go straight into the press. We press them. They go into a pan underneath the press. The press is a big cylinder with a bladder in it that rotates, inflates, deflates. And we end up getting about 160 gallons of Viognier juice per ton of fruit. We then pump that juice into a tank, let it settle out and get some of the heavy solids out. And then we pull that juice into barrels. Something we do a little bit differently, where we put the non-fermented juice into barrels to ferment. This gives a lot more complexity, and in my opinion, it gives a very distinct flavor profile. We can play around with barrels, toast, and all that, but the wine ferments for about 4 to 6 weeks in barrels, and then we give it another 6 months plus to settle and age before we finally blend it. And for instance, this wine was bottled in March of 2019. I always like to go over, I used to do with Tom Folders and at Reunions Weekend, the Wine 401. I did that for about 5 or 6 years. I think the last one was 2017. We'd always talk about tasting wine because not everyone is totally familiar with that whole process. It's very interactive. It's very interactive. We like to pour the wine in our glass, give it a swirl. This will help get some oxygen in that wine, sort of open up some of the flavors. Viognier is a wine that I actually don't like chilled super cold. I like it a little bit warmer because then you get some more of those volatile aromas. If you stick your nose in there, get in all the way in your glass if you have one. We'll give it a swirl. You'll pick up a lot of honeysuckle, vanilla notes, floral components, some lychee, some zest. To me, Viognier is always a very southern sort of flavor profile. You have all that, very southern summer flavor profile. It has that honeysuckle on the nose, the floral component, and when you give it a taste, while you taste, slurp in a little bit of air through your mouth. So you'll get a little bit of slurping action, and that gets a little bit more, I think that spreads the wine out over your mouth a little bit more, so you could kind of experience this whole wine. Traditional Viognier flavors are apricot, peach. I get a little bit of mango. This is a nice balanced wine. On the finish, you get some of the barrel components. We normally use older barrels on this wine. older meaning barrels that are 4 or 5 years, that have been used 4 or 5 times already. What that does is it eliminates a lot of the toast character on the barrel. So you don't have a lot of the toast influence, which can be complex sugars from the oak, like vanilla, things like that. Vanilla, caramel, even coconut sometimes. But on this one, you do pick up a little bit of the vanilla. We used about 75% neutral barrels on this. So there's a little bit of vanilla, some brown sugar on the finish, and then that very varietal characteristic apricot on it. This is a wine that I think it won a gold medal in the San Francisco International Wine Competition last year. We're very proud of it. 18 was a challenging vintage for us. It was a very white year overall, but turned out to be a really nice wine. Are we going to have any questions, Josh, in between, or are we just going to go through the whole process?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, for those who have video, if you can raise your hand and I'll unmute, but if you have any, perfect. Marla, you are live.
Well, I was going to ask, okay. I was going to ask you what kind of barrels, but you kind of let it slip in. It's oak. The grapes that you're using, are they called Viognier grapes?
Yeah, so great question. Viognier is a varietal of grapes, just like you might be familiar with Chardonnay or Merlot. Viognier is a very specific type of white grape. We have about 4 acres of it on our property, and during our barrel fermentation, most wine barrels are made out of oak, whether it's French oak or American oak. They are different species and they're grown in different locations, and what that does is has a big influence on the grain density and of the wood itself. So if you have American oak barrels are what they use in bourbon and whiskey. So you toast them really high, you can get those really intense vanilla flavors, caramel flavors, things like that. If you have a more delicate wine, the toast can overpower all the fruit components of it. So that's why certain wines do better with French oak, which has a much more tighter grain, so you can age the wines longer. You have less of that toast impact on the wine. What we do is we use very old French oak barrels. We have barrels that are probably a decade old, if not, I think we may have some barrels that are almost 12 years, 15 years old. They're very neutral, so you don't get that toast component, but you get a different, wood is porous, so it does allow oxygen through the wood itself during that fermentation and aging process. So it helps develop flavors, it helps soften flavors. We do something called lees aging, where we take the juice, put it in a barrel, and we do add yeast to our barrels to ferment the sugars in the grape juice into alcohol as ethanol. But it also produces CO2 and it also produces heat. So that's why we keep the barrels in a cold room. We can't fill them up all the way. We have bungs that allow the air. Bungs are the caps on the barrels that keep the wine in and the bugs out, essentially. It also keeps the oxygen out, but they have one-way valves to allow the CO2 to come out. Otherwise, these bungs would be flying off. During an active alcohol fermentation, this whole thing is just churning and churning. And we like to do these small batches in the barrels because we can get a lot of contact with what we call the lees. The lees are the very small grape skin particles that are left over in that solution, and also the yeast cells, which as the yeast consumes that sugar, it multiplies, they grow, there's more and more yeast, and then when they run out of sugar, they die. But what they do is they give a lot of complexity and softness to the palate. So we like that intense lees contact in the barrels. The barrels themselves really only hold about 60 gallons of wine, which is about 25 cases. So sounds like a lot for just one person, but in terms of a commercial production, it's a pretty small amount of wine per barrel. Any other questions?
All right.
Yep.
We'll move on to the next.
Moving on. So the next wine we have is we call it it's a semi-sweet rosé. This wine is made out.
I think Attila has a question.
Oh, yeah.
Not a question as much as just to mention a little bit about the pairings.
Oh,
This
yeah.
wine, because this is one of the fun things about wine, of course, is to enjoy it either by itself or with a pairing. And by the way, I think this wine is very well suited for tropical climates or subtropical climates. So hopefully all of you who are in Florida, and we're quite jealous that you're all down in that beautiful state, are able to appreciate this wine. I think it's again very, very well suited. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about some pairings, Chris?
Yeah, Viognier traditionally is a little bit tricky to pair with sometimes. It doesn't always have a lot of acid on it, and it has a lot of very tropical fruits. So for me, this is something that goes really well with a lot of Asian cuisine, whether it's spicy Thai food or some nice Vietnamese food with basically lots of fresh. It goes well with white fish, fresh herbs. You know, that cilantro that you see in a lot of that Thai or in Vietnamese cuisine. To me, I always say like it really epitomizes a lot of the American South in terms of the flavor profile with all that bright peach and that honeysuckle. So personally, I'm a drink it on your own kind of guy, but you know, white fish, whether it's pan fried with maybe some lemon butter sauce, some pan fried white fish with a lemon butter sauce, or anything, you know, in that Asian spicy cuisine, it can really handle that with all those tropical fruits. There's the mango flavors, the nice citrus component to it as well.
Fantastic.
Okay, so moving on to the, this is our semi-sweet rosé. This is a painting that Attila's father did. And we put it on the bottle. We also have a dry rosé where there's another still life of some flowers. This is a wine that is from 2018. 2018 was a challenging year for us in the vineyards. It was very wet in Virginia, basically start to finish. We had a very rainy year, so it was very cloudy. All that makes it very difficult to ripen grapes. We basically think, if you think about all the famous wine regions, whether it's, you know, Napa in California or a lot of areas in Spain or France, they're usually very arid, very, very dry, at least during the growing season. You want that because all the water, for actually a lot of reasons, but all the water and cloud cover during a rainy season will dilute a lot of the flavors of the grapes. So the other difficulty is if it's cloudy, you don't have as much sun, so it's harder to ripen fruit. And for those of you, maybe if you grow tomatoes at home and you're trying to vine ripen them and they're getting really ripe, and then you have one of those massive afternoon downpours and your tomato splits, that can happen to us in the vineyard. So just times like 100,000 because grape berries are so small. So we made a lot of rosé in 18, but I think it turned out really well. There's really three main ways to make rosé. You can do it the easy way by blending white and red wine together, which we've never done. I've never done that. There's another method called where you can actually pick the fruit for rosé. So you pick it a little bit earlier. Rosé is made from red grapes, and the color comes from the skin contact. The skin is where all of the color comes from, the tannins, which are that drying component of when you drink red wine. It's also where color, tannins, and a lot of the flavor components come from too as well. So the third way of making rosé, which we've done a lot of the times, is called the Sanye method, where we'll take our fruit, our red fruit, we'll destem it, put it in a tank, and we'll let it sit for anywhere from 1 to 3 days. And then what we do is we pull a lot of the liquid off of that. So that juice that comes out is more of this lighter color as opposed to a dark red wine. 2018 was a bit of an anomaly with the weather that we had. So we actually made this wine. We picked it for rosé and made it for rosé that way. This is mostly made out of Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc is one of the 5 main red Bordeaux varietals. If you see a Bordeaux style wine, and you know, if it's a Bordeaux wine from Bordeaux, you'll know that it should contain basically 5 grapes. Those are Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Malbec, or Petite Rideau. In America, if you see a Bordeaux style blend, it's actually called a Meritage, but here, this is our semi-sweet rosé. It has a little bit of residual sugar on it, so that means there's a little bit of sweetness on it, but it's very light. And if you give it a swirl, give it a smell, it has these nice pomegranate cherry components to it. When it was young, it almost had this, for those of you that know Jolly Ranchers, it almost had this cherry Jolly Rancher flavor profile to it. And if you give it a sip, it has this very candied cherry component. It's very candied cherry, a juicy berry component as well. And then just a very small hint of tannin at the end. Again, this is about 95% Cabernet Franc with a little bit of Merlot in it. And in terms of sugar, it has 2.5% residual sugar on it. And what that means is that there's 25 grams of sugar per liter of wine. So in the range of wines, it's actually considered a semi-sweet wine. Actually, it might also be considered an off-dry wine. This is the cherry component of this wine. Attila was talking about the food pairings earlier. This is something that you can pair with. We've said chocolate-based desserts, things like that. A lot of the cherry component and the sweetness goes well with the chocolate notes. Does anyone have any questions, comments? Marla again, thank you.
Marla again.
She was on, okay, there you go.
Okay. So are the grapes put into a barrel or are they put into a steel container?
A steel tank, yeah. So this one, so what we do with our red wines and with rosés are the fruit comes in, and we actually have a machine that de-stems them. This is a big machine with a cylinder in it and an auger with a lot of tines on it, and it spins and it actually knocks all the berries off of the stems. The berries fall through into a bin that we have below, and then the stems go out the side. We don't want the stems for rosé or red wine production because they have a lot of stringent tannins and flavors to it, so they can be stringent, bitter. If they're not fully ripe, it can put a lot of herbaceous qualities into the wine. So we don't want that. But during this de-stemming process, we actually have bins that are about 1 ton fermentation bins. And we can either keep the grapes in there, and what we do is we actually manually, we call them punch downs, where twice a day, 3 times a day, we'll manually stir the barrels. The other option is we can put them in a large stainless steel tank. We have tanks that hold up to about 1,300 gallons, and they actually have lids that we can remove. So we dump the grapes into these tanks, and then what we do is we want to extract all these flavors from the skins. So we cycle over the liquid onto the skins during that process. So it kind of depends on, your question is basically dependent on what we're trying to do with the wine and how much of it we have. If we have a very small amount, we might do it in a very small bin that only holds half a ton of fruit, which is not a lot of fruit for a commercial winery. This wine was done in 1 ton bins. I think we had about 5 1-ton bins of it, but we have done it in tanks before.
So when you were talking earlier, you were talking about 3 different ways to process it. So this is the second way, not the Sanye way?
This is not the Sanye way. No, this is fruit that wasn't optimally ripe for red wine production. So we can pick it a little, we call it picking it early, essentially, where it's not as ripe for red wine production, but we just pick it as we would. We pick it a little bit early, so it has a little bit more acid and a little bit less color on it. And then we ferment it, we de-stem it, let it sit on those skins for, I think this spent about, 18 was a challenging year and we wanted a little extra color. So this wine actually spent, I think, about a week on its skins, which is kind of a long time. And then when the sugar levels in that wine, in that fermenting wine, were depleted, what we do is we pull the liquid out of the bin, then take the leftover grapes, put them in our press because there's still a lot of liquid in there and a lot of wine that's in the berries. And we'll have our press crush those grapes, get the remaining liquid out, and then we blend it all together.
Thank you, Chris.
Does that make sense?
Because of the extra fermentation time, is this a darker rosé than what you normally produce?
Yes, actually, we don't. I wish I had another bottle of our normal rosé next to us, but normally the color is more in that pink to light salmon range. A lot of the times we do use Cabernet Franc and Merlot. That's sort of what we've learned to be some of our preference for our rosé production. But it's normally significantly lighter, not really this reddish. It's more of a traditional sort of, like I said, pink or a very light salmon. So it has like a little, that slightly orange hue to it. That's normally what we see.
Okay. And at some point, could you tell us about which of the varietals are grown sort of surrounded by the woods versus more out in the open?
Yeah, so we have 4 different vineyard sites. One of them is near our entrance. If you've ever been here, we grow Chardonnay and Pinot Gris there, surrounded by pasture and then the road. We have another vineyard called our Apple Vineyard, which is sort of surrounded by trees on 2 sides. We actually have a block of Merlot near that tree line that is challenging to ripen because of the orientation of the sun's rotation and the shade that the trees along that tree line cause. Also, we have the raccoons, the squirrels that just want to go after this fruit once it gets really ripe. So we've learned to pick that block of Merlot early and dedicate it to the rosé production. Another vineyard site we have is called our Sunnyfield Vineyard, which was planted in 2003. It's surrounded on 2 sides by a significant amount of woods, and it's definitely pushed back a little bit more. We net our fruit. We do have fences up. We used to have electric fence around everything, but some vineyards have 8-foot fences. Deer can still jump over 8 feet, but then you have the birds, the raccoons, the turkey, squirrels. Basically everything wants to eat grapes. So we spend a lot of time netting the fruit. Once veraison happens, veraison is the term for when a grape goes from if it's a red grape, it goes from the green color to the red. And that process usually occurs sometime in late July or August. It really depends on the varietal. We also have our last vineyard block is a very large one for us. It's about 12 acres. And I think we have about 6 different types of grapes on there. And so it kind of depends on the year in terms of what we dedicate towards rosé, but also the limitations that a vineyard might impart on us, or just the experience of our vineyards were first planted in 1981, which is a long time for the Virginia wine industry. So we've had a lot of practice learning what works and what does not work.
Thanks for the question, Jeff.
Who's next? Margaret?
Missy, you can unmute yourself.
There you go. So I have 2 questions. One
Yep.
is I don't really know when you pick the fruit, but if it gets cold a little earlier, does that help make the sugar set? So I grow oranges
Mm-hmm.
pick in January, but so there's a trick between if we get a bit of this is in Central Florida, so if we get a bit of a cold snap, a certain amount of cold is good, but then there's that gentle when you want the sugars to set and then you want to pull it. And then the other thing is, what do you guys do with the residue? Like once you take the juice out, what happens to the rest?
Okay, so answer to the first part of your question. Our harvest starts. We have 1 harvest a year. Grapevines in this part in the northern hemisphere where we are, they produce at our latitude produce 1 crop a year. So we usually pick. If we were doing sparkling wines, people are picking Chardonnay, and sometimes in late July or early August. For us, the first grapes that ripen are Pinot Gris, which is usually in mid-August. After that, the past few years, we've been picking a lot of our white grapes, our Chardonnay or Viognier, in late August, but traditionally we do pick those in early September. The red grapes begin to ripen fully. They require a longer growing season, and it depends on the variety of grape for when we do pick them. But we start picking those usually in mid-September, late September, sometimes through October, mid-October. If it's an exceptional year, or you all went to UVA, so mid-Atlantic weather is the only consistency is that there is none. Every year is different. It's part of the beauty of the wine industry here, I think, is that we have all this seasonal variation in our wines, but usually harvest is mid-August through the end of October. We rarely have cold in September and October or anything substantial that would hurt the grapes. If you were to go to other regions, maybe in Canada, things like that, that's where you can make those ice wines, meaning like that the grapes, they have an ideal growing season where you have very clean fruit, and then they get hit with frost fairly early in the year relative to Virginia and Florida, so the grapes actually freeze on the vine. But that's what they want, because if you do that, then you can make a wine that when you press that fruit off, the water in the grape stays frozen, and you have a higher sugar level in those wines, so you can make dessert style wines. Meaning very sweet, higher alcohol, very sweet wines. Your other question was, what was your other question?
Residue.
Oh, it's called pumice. Yeah, we have a big compost pile. That's where that goes. Some people can take those pumice. Basically, when we have a red wine, if we ferment it dry to dryness and then press it, we basically almost have hockey pucks. These things, the leftover seeds, the skins that are in the press, they're so dry. There's not much to them. Some people take them and add liquid to make, it's slipping my mind, the Italian, it's an Italian style of distilled liquor. I'll think of it in a second. But some people use that, and they make distilled alcohol out of it. Ours, it goes to the compost pile, and that's what a lot of people do with it. But again, like I said, these things are so dry. They're like, I mean, they're basically little bricks coming out of the press.
We have one more question from Steve. Okay, we have a couple of questions. All right, so I'm going to go to Steve and Christy. Here we are.
Hi, was that grappa that you were trying to think of?
Thank you, yes.
Okay, that's not our question, but Steve came up with it. He studied in Italy. I'm from Fort Lauderdale. I don't farm. Can you explain what you mean by netting the grapes?
Oh, we have, so all of our grapes grow in trellises. We have systems where we have about, depending on the vineyard and the style, we have about anywhere from I would say maybe a 2.5 foot to 4 foot trunk that extends from the ground up. Then we run about 4 wires, and along this wire, this is where we like to train our fruit. So we take, we call it a cane, but it's basically a chute, and we'll lay it down along this wire. And from there, we have the shoots come up. So it's called vertical chute positioning. We want these. We have that very traditional long row of vineyards, not the ones where sometimes you'll see like these gnarly small vines kind of like going all over the place. We have a lot of very nutritious soil, a lot of rain during the growing season, so we really need to restrict these vines and get as much sun onto the fruit so it can fully ripen. So we train cords along this wire, and then have the shoots grow vertically. During the growing season, we're actually manually out there pulling leaves from that fruit area, straightening vines out, because otherwise it'll just become a jungle very quickly. And so what we do is, once the fruit is up, we actually run netting it's about 3 foot long netting along this trellis system on both sides, thousands of clips to keep the animals out, and that's our version of doing it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Tammy?
Yeah, hi. I've noticed when I buy wines, there's often a variety of alcohol content available. Do you try to keep it to a certain level, and what are the benefits of, high or low alcohol content?
Yeah, great question. So on the rosé, you'll actually see that there is no.
Yeah, I noticed that. I was looking for it and I didn't see it.
So it's called table wine. Table wine, by definition, is a wine, I want to say between 9 and 13.9%, below 14% alcohol. That's the definition of table wine. I think that's set by the government, the TTB, which is used to be the ATF. They have all the laws that control that. Most of our grapes, the final alcohol level is based on the amount of sugar that was in the grapes at the time of harvest. The amount of sugar that we measure when we get close to harvest, we'll actually take these small berry samples where we'll go through the vineyard and take 100 or 200 berry samples, where we'll actually go through and pull one berry from a cluster as randomly as possible, and then press those grapes by hand, bring it in the lab, and we'll check the sugar content, the acidity, the pH, things like that, because the amount of sugar determines the final alcohol, the potential alcohol. With certain varieties, we have certain goals that we look for in terms of ripeness. Sugar levels we measure, the term we use is bricks. So if you have a bricks level pushing 23, 24 bricks, basically that will relate to about a 14% potential alcohol wine. 14% is kind of like in the wine world, it used to be like things over 14% are high alcohol, and below that it's more moderate. In terms of winemaking styles, things have changed over the years. I think 10 years ago, people really wanted those super high alcohol wines, but those are difficult to drink lots of, first of all. So second of all, that alcohol component can overpower some other delicacies, nuances of the wine. It can be hot. Those wines can be hot, and again, they're a little bit harder to drink, and maybe not as food friendly as well. So depending on the wine, we do have certain alcohol numbers that we look for, but that's not like the most determining factor for us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Susie or Ann?
Yeah, got it. I love the Viognier. The bouquet was so floral, lots of white flowers. It's gorgeous. But I wanted to ask you about the soil, the terroir, because it is such an important part of the whole winemaking. So how is the terroir there? What do you have?
Mostly we have heavier clay soils throughout the majority of our vineyards. We do have vineyards. One of our vineyards has a little bit more, there's a little bit more outcroppings and some schist. You basically want, for grapes to grow really nice, to make really nice wine, grapes can grow anywhere, but if you give them well-drained soil, that's really what they want. So in Virginia, we have our 4 different, in Virginia, we have to deal with rain during the growing season. We have the humidity as well. So we look for, soil is really important, but the majority of the Piedmont region, which is basically where Charlottesville east, there's a lot of clay, and then as you get further to the ocean, it becomes more sandy. And you go up into the mountains, you have much more different soil types, but with the humidity that we have here, all the clay, which retains a lot of moisture, we really look for a lot of airflow is really important in well-drained soils. So we try and plant on slopes, and we try and keep airflow under the vines, above the vines. We do a lot of leaf pulling as well. But so the soil component is very important, but I think throughout the majority of this region, in the Charlottesville area, we have those heavier clay soils.
So we would call it, or you could call it like a Virginia adaptation, if you will, the way you're planting in the places that you choose then, because of the clay. I mean, you said clay, I'm going, oh my goodness, that's just going to retain a lot of water, and grapes are going to explode.
We don't have them explode too much, but you know, if we have a very large downpour, during hurricane season in the fall, that's when the fruit is getting very ripe, and as fruit gets, as it gets more ripe, the berries get larger, the skins get thinner, and they're more prone to bursting if we have a large rain event. So because of that, that's one reason why we plant on hillsides. That's why a lot of people plant on hillsides as well. But you also want as much sun exposure on those grapes, the actual grapes themselves, not just the leaves. So that's part of the reason why we do that.
And I think we have one more or two questions from Leslie, and then we're going to move on to the last line here, so you don't miss out. Leslie, here you go.
Yes, thank you. There's 4 of us here in Winter Park, Florida. We have 2 questions. Our first question is, what do you like most about your job?
One of my favorite parts of my job is the fact that is the holistic nature of it. Being a relatively small winery, we're more medium-sized for Virginia. We have about 22 acres of grapes. We make 6,000 cases of wine, and being at this scale, we're all involved in every part of the vine, planting, tending, harvesting the fruit to the winemaking process. It's not very mechanical. It's very manually oriented. And at the end of the day, once we press that fruit, we're working all day during harvest. This is, it's not a 9 to 5 during harvest. We work when the fruit's coming in, and so that's 7 days a week, sometimes 12, sometimes 14, 15 hours a day until the work is done. So that's part of the beauty of it. And then, you have to be very patient, because sometimes with some of our red wines, we'll have these wines in barrels for 2 or 3 years. So from that first vine planting, it usually takes about 3 years to really get any fruit off of it. And then you process it, and then the wine ages. I mean, that's almost a 5-year process at a minimum, start to finish. So, but you end up with a tangible product, which is very cool. I'm not putting, any other work or industry down, but it's just this wonderful holistic nature of start to finish, where the holistic nature of it, start to finish, where we're planting a vine, and then we will see this tangible product that everyone can enjoy. The other part of my job is everyone thinks it's interesting, so that always makes me feel good about myself.
Great. And our second question is, we're so curious about the artwork behind you, the cat. It has to be, it must be a significant piece. Can you tell us?
Yeah, so this is another painting by Attila's father, Sanye Woodward. This is Sam the cat. I never got to meet Sam the cat. I think he was here in the early 90s, mid 90s, something like that. Yeah, and he lived on the property for about 12 years. He is now on our Vin Blanc, which is a white wine blend that we sell. He's on the label, just like you see with the roses, with the sweet rosé. I think he was here for 12 or 13 years, and we have this really fun bottle. It's called Vin Blanc, which is a white wine, so we have a lot of versatility with it. But it's a semi-sweet white wine blend. Sam is on it, and it's a blue bottle, and it's just super fun.
Perfection. Oh, Attila, I got you. Here we are.
So I hope you don't mind me sharing, Chris, that this was an experiment, and it has a lot to do with Virginia weather. I heard that it rained 6 feet of water in 2018 in Virginia. I mean, it was just an amazing amount of water. And so we were going to make a Cabernet Franc wine, but this is winemaking in Virginia. Sometimes you have weather that is just so unpredictable and so challenging that you have to be creative with what you're going to make. And we're mostly known for very dry wines, including our dry rosé. So Chris, I hope I haven't divulged any of your secrets here, but again, this is chance. It just happened, and we had, and you, Chris, had to figure out, what are we going to do with our Cab Franc? And again, it's a label that's meant to be fun and enjoyable. It's the same like Sam the cat. easy enjoyment.
Yeah, and that's something important that Attila mentioned. We're not, one of the cool things about Virginia is we're not restricted by any federal laws or regulations that limit what we can grow in terms of the types of grapes and how we make the wine. You have those restrictions in old world in Europe. They want to retain what their regional identity in those wines. So they can only grow whether in Bordeaux they're restricted to their Bordeaux's, or in the Rhone they have their Syrah. So here we can grow anything we want. We can make it however we want, and that's one of the most fun aspects of it. Because the industry really is only about 40 years old, and then as I mentioned, you plant a grapevine, maybe you'll get fruit 2 or 3 years later, but it's not really in full production producing really nice quality grapes for usually about like 5 or 6 years. And if you messed up, then and that grape variety didn't work out, then you have to start that whole process over again. So we've learned a lot over the years what does grow well. And we're still learning. There's still a lot of experimentation. Attila mentioned the skin fermented white wines. And basically that's when we take white wines and make them as we would red wines. And it completely changes the profile. We have, sometimes people call them orange wine. There's no oranges in them, just the color of the wine can have an orange tint to it. But the profile is completely different. It's super fun. It's not for everyone, but it's something we can make a small batch of, and we have these very niche, very passionate Virginia wine drinkers that love all those new things and new styles of winemaking.
Perfect. On to the last. I think everybody's ready. Everyone's like, wow.
Yes, so the last wine we have is our Jefferson's Own Estate Reserve 2017. 2017 was a legendary vintage for Virginia. We had a phenomenal growing season start to finish. It was dry, it was hot, but it wasn't too hot, so we can ripen the fruit to optimal levels higher than we usually can, and we didn't have to worry about any of the weather. We always watch the weather regardless, but that didn't really impact anything. We had phenomenal growing season start to finish, though we didn't have any frost earlier in the year, which may have limited the final production. Again, in terms of Virginia wines, 2017, 2010 is another really famous vintage. 2019, we just started bottling our 19s back in March, and in terms of the whites, but the reds that are coming out that we're bottling this summer or even years from now I think they're going to be very impressive wines. Sugar levels on par with what you see, and alcohol levels on par with what you see in California. This wine, the Jefferson's Own Estate Reserve to us means that this is fruit that only comes from our vineyard. We do have a partner, the vineyards that we actively manage ourselves. We do have a partner vineyard in Nelson County that we worked with the last decade, and we do buy fruit from them. They have a much different climate, they have different weather patterns, so it's kind of sort of an effort to sort of hedge things. This year we had our grapevines bud out. I think they started budding out in late March, which is pretty traditional, but in Virginia we have the potential to have frost all the way through mid-May. And we had 2 frost events in April and 1 devastating one in May that really knocked out a lot of the primary buds, which are the most fruitful buds. So that's why we work with another vineyard, because he actually had less. He has different elevations, grows at different elevations, different weather patterns, and he had less significant frost damage. But this is our state reserve, so it's the best of the best from our property. That's how we define it. The 2017 is a blend of Petite Rideau and Cabernet Franc. For those of you who don't know Petite Rideau, it is one of the 5 main Bordeaux grapes, and it's traditionally used in Bordeaux as a blending agent. It's a very small berry, so that means when you ferment it, it has a very high skin to juice ratio. So what that means is you end up with really dark, really intense, really tannic wine. And it also naturally ripens a little bit higher sugar levels, so you have a higher alcohol, more colorful, more tannic wine. So it's really great to bulk up something like a Cabernet Franc or a Merlot if you want a little bit of color or a little bit more oomph to it. Virginia, Petite Rideau and Cabernet Franc are two grapes that people in Virginia have learned that grow very well, ripen very well consistently. They're both what I would consider to be more, Petite Rideau is a little bit more of a mid-season ripening grape, whereas Cabernet Franc, one of its relatives is Cabernet Sauvignon. So Cabernet Sauvignon needs a very long growing season. Some years we can grow it really well, and 2017 was one of those years, but we actually don't grow any Cabernet Sauvignon on the property. This wine though, spent about 20 months on oak. Lots of new oak on it as well. This is meant to be one of our premium wines, so we put some really nice brand new oak. It's a mix of some American oak and some French oak as well. But if you give your glass a swirl and give it a smell, you'll pick up a lot of that oak component. You'll get the spice complexity, a little bit of vanilla on it, some herbs. The blackberry, there's blackberry coming from the Petite Rideau, almost a little bit of tobacco notes as well I can get on there. And if you give it a taste, this wine spent about 20 months in barrels, so it's very well integrated right now. It's very well balanced. There's some berry notes, some blueberry components, very balanced tannins, a nice lengthy finish. It actually won, this has been racking up, we bottled this wine last year, but it's been racking up a bunch of gold medals in Virginia's Governor's Cup. It won a gold medal this past year. It won a gold medal and finished in the top 3 in the Monticello wine competition earlier this year. But yeah, just a really beautiful wine, lots of oak. This is a wine that you could probably lay down for 5 to 10 years, although hopefully all of you are enjoying it now. In terms of the winemaking process, I briefly went over this, but we pick all the fruit by hand. It goes into a machine and it comes into what we call our crush pad, which is on the back side of our winery where we process all the fruit. We remove the fruit from the stems and it goes into bins or tanks. Most of this was in tanks. And what we do is twice a day, after we add yeast, we do add yeast to everything. Twice a day, what we do is we pull liquid from the bottom of the tank and splash it over the top. What this does is it helps mix everything in that tank. We get a lot of liquid on the berries on the top. During the fermentation process, you have this what we call cap separation, where there's a lot of liquid on the bottom and all the CO2, the gas from the fermentation process, and the heat is pushing all the berries up towards the top. So we want to mix everything down because we want to extract all those flavors that are on those skins. As I mentioned earlier, the color. If you were to take a red grape like Merlot and just press it immediately, you would have a little bit of color in that product, and that's how you can make a lighter rosé. But if you leave that juice on its skins during the fermentation process, that's where you get all this color. You'll extract the color, the tannins, meaning that dryness that you get. Kind of like if you oversteep a tea, especially like a black tea, you get that drying effect on the sides of your mouth and the back. It's kind of like, it's almost like chalky tasting sometimes. That's the tannin. If you do it properly, it's just another component that helps add interest to that wine and complexity to the wine. It's also where all the fruit flavors come from. We call the phenols, or the scientific compound, and those all come from the skins as well. So this is a wine that spent about we had a couple different lots. I think it was usually these wines ferment for about 2 weeks to 2 to 4 weeks on its skins. After all the sugar is depleted during that initial alcoholic fermentation, we pull all the liquid off the berries using a pump, and then all those berries that are left on the skins, we'll put them in our press it, squeeze everything else out, mix it all together, transfer it into barrels, and that's where it undergoes something known as malolactic fermentation. This is the fermentation process where the malic acid, which is the main acid component in apples, it's that bright, sharp acid, is softened into lactic acid, which is the main acid in dairy products. So it has that sort of mouth coating fullness property to it. So we do all that, and 20 months later, we have this. Questions, comments?
If you have any questions, comments, I do have a question. So
Yeah.
I lived in Nelson County.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what vineyard is that?
So the vineyard is Silver Creek Orchards, which is off of Crabtree Falls Highway. If you go out and do the Crabtree Falls hike, you will pass this vineyard. They have about 500 acres total. They have there's an apple packaging plant there, so they have a few hundred acres of apples, and I think they're pushing about 100 acres of grapes as well.
Wow, amazing. Oh, Donsel, okay, we have a couple. So I'm gonna go to Donsel first, or Don SL. Let's see, hold on. Can you unmute yourself, Don?
There we go.
Perfect. Yep.
Okay. Hey, wait a minute. Come up here, guys. This is just a comment from the furthest south group attending this. This is the 3 Wahoos from Miami. I wanted to tell everybody how much we're enjoying Jefferson Vineyards and the entire program. So
fabulous.
Thank
you very much.
And we'd like to know.
I lost your audio.
Finish the 3 bottles.
Don, we lost you. You cut out there for a second. What would you like to know?
Who's going to take us home after we finish the 3 bottles?
We can call you a cab or an Uber.
We'll figure it out. Thank you, Don.
We are Wahoos. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you.
What a great one. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Appreciate it.
All right, let's see. There are a lot of questions. I believe Scott French was next. Hello, hello.
No, right in the middle.
Hello.
Perfect. Hello.
Hi, welcome from Orlando.
Winter Park.
Winter Park.
We're all in Winter Park. There's like 3 people.
She has a question. So my question is, are there any sulfates added to the wine? And we had chocolate to go with our rosé, and it was an incredible pairing.
Excellent.
Just wanted to comment and also question.
Awesome. Yes. So if you notice on the bottles, it usually says there's a under the government warning. It does say contains sulfites. Sorry. We do. First of all, sulfites are naturally occurring during the fermentation process in grapes, but we do add small amounts, very low, ideally imperceptible amounts of sulfites, usually based on the pH of the wine, in order to make it a little bit more stable and protect it from oxidation during that process. That's the main reason why you'll see that in wines. You try and keep it below 45 or 50 parts per million, which is far lower than even, hard-boiled eggs if you've had them for a while, or anything on the salad bar if those exist in the future. And I don't know, but yes, we add them in small amounts. What it does is it helps with microbial stability in terms of preventing yeast from possibly fermenting if there's re-fermenting the product, if there's residual sugar in there. And it also protects against oxidation, oxygen being very beneficial during the fermentation process, but not the finished product of wine. Too much oxygen can degrade it, so we want to protect it. What was your other question?
Oh, then they said they like the chocolate with the rosé.
Yes, thank you.
Who has another question? We have a bunch of people. All right, perfect. If you can unmute yourself, Julie. Oh, try one more time. Perfect.
Yeah, I'm
Bob.
Bill Pope. We're dialing in from Naples, Florida, which is a long way from Charlottesville. But we bleed orange and blue. So we were up there about 4 years ago and had a wonderful visit to the winery. I wanted to ask about climate change. And you mentioned a lot of rain and then other climate issues. How is climate change affecting you?
Yeah, climate change is, if you work in agriculture, it's a real thing. The past few years, so let me start by saying I started working here in 2007. That was my first vintage working here. So since then, it's been a good 13 years. We've traditionally harvested grapes like Chardonnay and Viognier in the first or second week in September. the last few years, it's been bumped up. We've been picking fruit at the end of August. 2019, we almost had all of our white grapes off the vine before September. And for us, that's unheard of. You know, part of it was an exceptional growing season in a very hot year. If it's very hot, almost too hot, you can have these massive jumps in sugar levels. And once the grapes start really getting super ripe, the skins will start thinning, and then you really can't. You'll lose balance. You'll lose acid balance. You'll have too much sugar, which can mean a little bit too much alcohol. So it does affect us in terms of that, in terms of when we pick the fruit. But we've also found that, you know, that we are on the mid-Atlantic, so we have to deal with the influences of tropical storms or hurricanes that come off the coast, combined with lots of sun as well, which, you know, we can have either tons of rain or tons of sun. And we found that varieties that ripen earlier in the season or have a really thicker skin are the most beneficial to to us in terms of consistent product and ripening. If you have a thicker skin, it's more less likely to burst if you have too much water. It also is less likely to sunburn or have insect issues as well. I can go over a list of a long list of things we battle in the vineyard that we didn't have to deal with when I first started here, whether it's fruit flies that are able to actually drill into non-compromised skins, and then they lay their eggs, and then that's an issue. Stink bugs. We didn't have stink bugs 13 years ago. Now we have the brown marmorated stink bugs everywhere. So lots of things that relate to weather change, and we found that if it can ripen a little bit earlier and has a little bit thicker skin, it does really well for us. I'm not trying to go too far on this question, but there's also something called French American hybrids, where they take traditional French grapes and they've bred them with Native American grapes. And what that does is it makes them a little bit more cold hardy in terms of if we have a very cold winter, they may not have cold damage, or they may be less prone to disease during the growing season. So there's a lot of science out there. It's a massive industry, it's a huge tourism industry for Virginia, but obviously the wine industry as a whole has in the United States has been huge. One of Susie's friends was making wine in South Dakota, and I've never had wine from South Dakota before. So you can do it anywhere if you have the right types of grapes. But we're constantly learning, constantly evolving because of the climate. Yes.
Tammy, feel free to go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Chris. I just want to ask you, where did you learn everything? Did you kind of learn on the job, or did you have some experience before this job?
Well, I went to UVA, which is how I learned how to drink really well.
That's a good start.
But no, I come from a family that my dad makes wine at home. My grandfather made wine at home. They makes beer at home as well. That my parents had a few grapevines as well. You know, just like very do-it-yourselfers. So it's kind of always been like in my blood, and I fought it as long as I could. But I started working here prior to going to architecture school. I wanted to do something a little bit fun.
Me too.
I love being outside, and when I was in the studio, I really missed the hands-on nature of the winemaking industry and being in the vineyard and making the wine. Jefferson Vineyards is where I learned how to make wine, and the only winery I've ever worked at. So,
wow. Okay. And did you say you're from New York originally?
I'm from northern Westchester County, New York. Basically, my wife says just tell people you're from Connecticut. So we're like I grew up a mile from Connecticut in northern Westchester County.
Well, I was also in the A school, and there's other A school people on the call too.
Very cool.
Yeah. So, thanks.
All right, we're gonna go to Sawyer. Carlson, you unmute yourself. Perfect.
Hi. I just am wondering, I know that with COVID-19 and everything, I know that has affected, the tasting room and who all has been able to go there. How has that, or how do you predict that will impact harvest, production? Like, how are you all planning and preparing for that as you look forward to this year's harvest?
Yeah, our tasting room has been closed since March. Is that right, Attila? Yeah, so our tasting room has been closed since March. The main component of our business is that personal experience. We invite people out to the vineyard, share the stories, share the wines. A lot of people are not, basically everyone who drinks wine or has ever had a glass of wine knows what Chardonnay or Pinot Gris or Sauvignon Blanc or Merlot are, but and we do grow some of those and share those, but we have a lot of varieties people have never tried before, along with the stories and the connection with the land. So our model has always been that tasting experience, that personal experience. We have been closed for the last 3 months. We did reopen two or three weeks ago, first to our wine club members, but right now we're doing bottle only service. So not the tasting experience, but we have, we've been branching out with wine flights in terms of people can have, try 4 different wines by themselves, and we have some tasty notes, things like that for them. In terms of how harvest will work out, we will have a lighter harvest unintentionally because of the frost that we had earlier this year, which kind of knocked us back. We had, as I mentioned, we had a mid-May frost, which hit a lot of the shoots when they were about pretty significant size, about a foot tall, and those are the most fruitful shoots that we have. So we will see a reduction in production this year. I think definitely around the Charlottesville area, we got hit really hard, worst frost in like 20 years. And I think we are blessed with you saw from the helicopter picture that Attila sent, we have tons of outdoor space. So we kind of promote that. We have a huge field, multiple acres of field and tons of outdoor space. And so we're trying to accommodate our guests through utilizing that big space to keep everyone safe.
Can I ask a question too?
Yeah.
Have you ever partnered with any like distilleries and stuff with your barrels and swapping things out?
No, we haven't done that yet. We haven't swapped out barrels to distilleries, but last year we did have some Merlot distilled. I think it's 160 proof brandy at this point, and the goal is to make a port style wine in the 20 harvest. So we had this fruit. We picked it, fermented it into wine, and made wine out of it, and then brought it to a distillery, who then distilled it down to about, I think it's, I want to say it's 75 or 80% alcohol at this point. And the goal was to make that into a port style or fortified wine. We'll see. That'll last. We have a couple kegs of it. It'll last a long time safely with that much alcohol. So the plan was 2020, but we'll see how that goes.
Thank you.
Oh, we have a question that was typed from Steve and Christy. What types of food would best be paired with the estate reserve?
Oh, the estate reserve. Yeah, it's about 50-50 Cabernet Franc and Petite Rideau. Cabernet Franc is a little bit more medium body, so this is a very well balanced wine. It's not like a super tannic, super overwhelming Petite Rideau, which normally when we have Petite Rideau, we would say like a heavier style meat. Whether it's a ribeye or even a short rib, Petite Rideau pairs well with. But I think the Cabernet Franc component of this would maybe bring it down to maybe like a roast pork, lamb, things like that would do well. There's still a lot of oak presence on this wine as well, and that medium style tannin. So usually the rule of thumb is the more tannins, the fattier the cut it can handle. But I think this would be really nice with a medium cut beef or a roast pork. Attila, do you have any other food pairing comments on the ER17?
I actually haven't paired that much food with it because it's such a delightful wine to just enjoy on itself. I mean, I think it would probably do very well with cheese. The Cab Franc component of it, similar to the Meritage 17, probably would do very well with cheeses. Yeah, I did want to mention something about climate change. I think that is a very, very important question. Whether you believe in it or not, the climate is being very disrupted, and we've certainly felt it. I was born and raised in Spain. In Spain, we felt it big time, and my wife is Vietnamese, so we go to Vietnam quite often. And also the climate there has changed quite a lot in the last 15 years. But Chris, I just wanted to highlight something you mentioned. For us in the wine industry here in Virginia, it's all about experimentation and finding what works and what doesn't. I think a lot of that has to do with the climate already being so challenging from year to year. But it could very well be that the hybrid varietals, instead of the French varietals that we have right now, it could be that the hybrids end up doing really well in the future. We went on a trip to Chile and Argentina and Uruguay a couple months ago, and we actually went there to learn a little bit about climate change. And in some vineyards in Chile, they have moved their plantings 200 or 300 kilometers. That's probably what, Chris, about 160 miles, maybe? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, they're having more extreme changes than we are, but I think at the end of the day, this is going to be a changing environment where we at least have to adapt and figure out what grapes will work. And just a parting thought, maybe you've heard about this, but England is producing some amazing sparkling wines right now. They've even taken on the champagnes of France with that. Who would have thought about that? So I think we need to be very flexible and open-minded to keep trying new things here.
Wonderful. Any last questions?
Anna, I just wanted to say I truly, truly enjoyed the Reserve. It's delicious. It's so complex. It's a wonderful, wonderful offering, if you will, from Virginia. And I'm sold. It's really, really good. And since you mentioned South Dakota, I will say, that I'm the one that goes to the South Dakota winery to make wines over there too. And yes, the weather is such a huge factor that you just never know exactly what's going to happen. But to you, I think winemaking is one of the most amazing things that one person can do, because it's like the process of creation. You start with one thing and you end up with another. And in the process, there's so much. I tell my friends that it's science, it's magic, and it's art all together. It's absolutely wonderful. So I salute you and I congratulate you, because this is absolutely wonderful. And while we've got the microphone, I will say thank you all for joining us. I'm Susie Stone with the UVA Club of Jacksonville. I got this started with Attila and the gang and Thomas and Jefferson Vineyards, and I'm so grateful they were willing to offer the UVA clubs here in Florida this opportunity tonight. I'm so happy to see so many people on this call tonight. So thank you, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for coming. Chris, any last parting words? Attila, any last parting words? Oh, there you go.
Marla's got something to say.
Oh, Marla has something to say. Marla, you are unmuted.
Okay, I just wanted to know, well, I had two little questions, but do you only sell it via the winery, or can I go to a store somewhere? I mean, I'm in Fort Lauderdale, so I'm not going to get it, but.
So we do. So most of our wine is sold within Virginia, DC, and North Carolina, so regionally. But we do ship to Florida, as you all know. But we do not have a distributor in Florida currently. No. So you would not be able to get it at the grocery store. Probably the closest one would be in North Carolina or Virginia Beach, but we can ship all of our wines to you as hopefully you have during this tasting. So
okay.
It's probably the best way.
And I guess my other thing was, have you ever had like an emergency harvesting where, you said, oh my God, the grapes are going to burst or something like that, and so you could get everybody together and rush out to the fields and something like that? You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. Yes, every year is different. 2011, 2018 were very wet years. Also 2003. You know, it happens. So if we're approaching ripeness or optimal ripeness for a certain grape, and we really, and you know, if we have a weather event that may be detrimental to that, and we don't think it can make it through that, then yeah, we'll rush out there and bring a team to pick everything. I think most of the full-time people that have worked here have ended up picking fruit at some point. But we also have crews that come in and you know, they go through and they pick the fruit. All the fruit is picked by hand. We don't have a mechanical harvester, so it takes a little bit extra time to do it manually. But we can also be very selective with what we do pick. And you know, lots of people sort their grapes prior to processing, but we do a little bit of that sorting during the actual picking. And if we have spoiled grapes or something less than ideal, we can actually just drop that fruit and then make sure we have all the good stuff. But yes, the answer to your question is yes. We have to be very flexible and very, very dynamic with how we approach things during harvest, because every year is different. And you know, lots of years there's pleasant surprises as well as, you know, the hardships as well. So 2019 was one of those years where we had sugar levels that I haven't seen since 2009 or 2010. So, you know, that's part of the beauty of Virginia wine is every year is different.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Attila and Chris and the UVA Club of Jacksonville for getting this all squared away and organized. You know, I'm actually thinking we might want to do something again with the attendance, and maybe I'm already getting a lot of head nods. So, no, but thank you all for coming out, and thank you, Chris and Attila, for sharing the history and those 3 fantastic wines. We really appreciate it. And if there aren't any last questions, I think we'll call it a night, unless you gentlemen have any last words.
Yeah, I do have one last thing to say. We have been doing virtual tasting events. So if you keep track of us on Facebook or on our website, we did a virtual tasting event last Wednesday. So if people are interested, they can, you know, purchase the wine ahead of time, have it shipped to their house, and then we have a very interactive experience as well. Like Attila's on it, I'm on it. Usually we'll bring in someone else from the winery, and we'll try and answer your questions, or you know, go over. Sometimes there's a theme. We'll select one type of grape and one type of wine, and we'll do that. Or maybe it's just a certain vintage. So keep an eye on our Facebook if you enjoyed this, or you're one of those wine nerds who wants to learn more about the process. We will probably have another one in maybe the end of July, something like that is I think what we're looking at.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that this is probably our 5th or 6th virtual tasting. And you all have been the most engaging audience that we've had. So I do want to thank you, because it makes it fun on our end, on Chris and my end as well. And you have my email address. I think I emailed most of you. So if you're ever here, email me in advance. Be happy to come out and say hello to you.
Fantastic. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and yeah, have a great rest of your night. Bye-bye now.
Take care. Bye.